Imagine the moment. Johannesburg, June 2026. The Vuvuzelas are already screaming before the referee even blows the whistle. 80,000 people packed inside a stadium the whole world said South Africa wasn't ready for again. And this time, Bafana Bafana doesn't just show up, they win. But here's the thing nobody is talking about. That win doesn't just make history, it breaks it. Because when South Africa goes on a run in World Cup 2026, something happens to global football that nobody, no pundit, no analyst, no FIFA executive had ever calculated. The ripple effects reach so far, so fast, that by the time the semifinals arrive, we're not just watching a football tournament anymore. We're watching the entire football world shift on its axis. And it all started with one goal. A goal nobody expected from a country the world had already forgotten. Let's go back to where this alternate reality begins. Not 2026. Not even close. It's 2010. The whole world is watching South Africa host the most watched sporting event on the planet. And Bafana Bafana, ranked 83rd in the world, do something remarkable. They don't just survive the group stage, they score. They compete. They give their nation something priceless. For 90 minutes against Mexico, they made the world believe. For 90 minutes against France, they made France look scared. But they go home, 1 point behind, just one. Now here's the question that changes everything. What if 16 years later, on home soil again, with the World Cup finally returning to Africa as a co-host alongside Morocco and Egypt in 2030, still far off, South Africa finds itself as an invited guest nation in the expanded 48-team World Cup 2026, held across the United States, Canada, and Mexico? What if FIFA's wildcard slot, designed to reward football development, lands in Pretoria? And what if South Africa, ranked low, underfunded, underestimated, arrives not to participate, but to haunt this tournament? The first sign comes in the group stage, and nobody takes it seriously. South Africa are drawn into Group H, alongside Portugal, Uruguay, and Senegal. On paper, it's a death sentence. On paper, they finish last. That's what the analysts say. That's what the analysts say. That's what the algorithms predict. That's what every football podcast spends 5 minutes confirming before moving on to something more interesting. But football has never cared about paper. In their opening match against Uruguay, South Africa don't just defend. They press. They transition. Their striker, a 24-year-old from Soweto who plays for Mamelodi Sundowns, and whose name nobody outside Southern Africa can pronounce correctly, scores in the 67th minute with a finish so composed it silences the entire broadcast team for 2 full seconds. Final score, 1-0. The football world laughs. Group stage upset. Happens every World Cup. They post the clip. They move on. But something is already beginning that nobody can see yet. The Portugal match. This is where it gets complicated. Ronaldo retired from international football in 2024. Portugal, without Ronaldo, is still dangerous. Bruno Fernandes, Vitinha, Pedro Neto. But there's a psychological question mark hanging over them that has followed them since Ronaldo's farewell. And South Africa, playing in the suffocating Dallas heat, in a stadium that feels hostile, somehow absorbs every wave of pressure Portugal throws at them for 70 minutes. Then the South African captain, a defensive midfielder who never hides from the ball, wins it in his own half, drives forward 60 meters, slips it left, and it ends up in the back of a net from a left-footed strike that deflects off a Portuguese center-back. 1-0. South Africa, again. Portugal equalize in the 88th minute. Fans exhale. Analysts reset. The draw keeps Portugal through, technically safe. And South Africa, they still need a result against Senegal. But here's the thing nobody noticed in that Portugal match. Here's the open loop that was ticking like a clock in the background. South Africa had found something. A system. A mentality. A way of playing that wasn't just defensive. It was predatory. They were waiting for teams to be just comfortable enough before they struck. And Senegal, who need only a draw to advance, would soon discover exactly how dangerous a comfortable team can be. The Senegal match becomes the moment this alternate reality fully ignites. Sadio Mane's era is over. Senegal are still formidable. Ismaïla Sarr, Pape Gueye, a new generation of lions ready to roar. But South Africa, needing a win to advance on goal difference, play the match of their lives. They go 2-0 up by the 55th minute. Senegal pull one back. South Africa hold. They hold. When the final whistle blows, the South African bench erupts in a way that hasn't been seen since Cameroon in 1990. Their coach, a quiet, methodical man who nobody interviewed during the group stage because nobody thought he'd matter, is lifted into the air by his players. And somewhere in a production room, a FIFA broadcast director makes a decision that will later define this entire tournament. They cut to the South African fans, not just in the stadium, in Johannesburg, in Cape Town, in Durban, streets full of gold and green, a nation that had been through a decade of political exhaustion, economic pressure, and self-doubt, standing in front of televisions at 3 a.m., screaming. The world sees it. And the world stops scrolling. The round of 32 should be the end. They face Argentina, reigning world champions, the best team on the planet, Lautaro, McAllister, a squad built to repeat. And for the first hour, it looks like the expected execution. Argentina are controlled. South Africa are camped in their own half. The commentators begin discussing brave but not enough narratives. Fans start mentally planning their Argentina quarterfinal watch parties. Then a handball in the box nobody expected the referee to call. Penalty. South Africa. The Soweto striker steps up. Pauses. The stadium is so quiet you can hear individual heartbeats through the broadcast. He converts. One knock. And now Argentina know they have a match on their hands. What follows is 40 minutes of the most chaotic, desperate, beautiful football this World Cup has produced. Argentina hit the post twice. The South African goalkeeper makes 3 saves that defy physics. In the 89th minute, Argentina equalize. Of course they do. Extra time, penalties. You already know what's coming, but you don't know the detail that makes it legendary. The Argentine penalty taker who misses, the one whose name will be remembered in South Africa forever for all the wrong reasons, is their captain. Their talisman, the man who had scored in every shootout he'd ever taken in his career. He hits the post. South Africa advanced to the quarterfinals of the World Cup 2026, and football, as a global conversation, has never been louder. Now here is where the consequences truly arrive, because this isn't just a story about one nation on a miraculous run. This is a story about what that run does to everything around it. The commercial mathematics of World Cup 2026 were built around certain assumptions. Argentina, Brazil, England, France in the latter stages. Sponsorship activations, broadcast deals, merchandise projections, all of it calibrated around the giants. When South Africa reaches the quarterfinals, entire advertising campaigns are suddenly irrelevant. Brands that had bet everything on particular matchups are scrambling. FIFA's own marketing department faces questions they've never had to answer before. But something far more important is happening off the pitch. Every African football federation that spent the last decade being told their players weren't good enough for European academies, that their leagues weren't developed enough, that their national teams were perpetual group stage exits. Every single one of them is watching a South African squad built almost entirely from domestic football tear through the biggest tournament in the world. The conversation about African football doesn't just change, it reverses, and that reversal will take years to fully understand. But it's beginning. Its exact starting point is traceable to a goalkeeper making 3 saves in Dallas in the round of 32. The quarterfinal against France is where this story reaches its most emotionally devastating moment. Because France are magnificent. They're the version of France that looked unbeatable in qualifying. Mbappé orchestrating rather than sprinting, a new generation ready to inherit. South Africa, for the first time in this tournament, look like a team running on empty. Their legs are gone. Their minds are still fighting, but the body keeps the score. France win 3-1. It's not even close after the first 20 minutes. And yet, the South African striker who scored twice in the group stage, who converted the penalty against Argentina, who became the face of this entire movement, he scores in the 78th minute. A consolation goal. Meaningless in terms of the scoreline. Everything in terms of what it means. He doesn't celebrate. He just stands there, arms out, looking at the crowd. And that image, that single image of a 24-year-old from Soweto standing in a quarterfinal of a World Cup with tears barely hidden behind his eyes, becomes the defining photograph of the entire tournament. Not the winning goal in the final, not the trophy lift, this image, this moment. Because sometimes the story of football isn't about who wins. Sometimes it's about who makes you believe while they still can. South Africa go home in the quarterfinals, but they don't leave. The tournament continues. France go deep. The final is played, a champion is crowned, but the television ratings for the remainder of the 2026 World Cup tell an uncomfortable truth for football's establishment, that the single most watched match of the entire tournament, globally, was not the final. It was South Africa versus Argentina. More concurrent viewers than any other match. More social media engagement than any single sporting event in history. More national broadcasting interruptions across Africa than any football match ever played. The world had tuned in for the giants and found it couldn't look away from the underdogs. FIFA's 2030 planning begins to shift. The African Football Development Fund receives 3 times its projected investment. 5 South African players receive offers from European clubs within 6 weeks of the tournament. The Soweto striker signs for a major European side, his first European club, at 24, after the world suddenly remembered he existed. And in South Africa, something that had been dying slowly begins to breathe again. Football had given them a mirror, and for the first time in years, they liked what they saw. This is what alternate realities are made of. Not just the moment the ball crosses the line, not just the scoreline or the bracket or the trophy. It's the moment when a nation that the world had quietly forgotten reminds the world and reminds itself of what it is capable of. South Africa in 2010 showed Africa it could host the world. South Africa in 2026, in this alternate reality, showed the world it could compete with it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the more important story. Because tournaments end, champions change, trophies collect dust, but the belief a nation carries out of a stadium and into the next decade, that never expires.